Welcome back. Tutor Edward here. In this video, I am going over enhanced for loops, which are also called for each loops. And I will begin by comparing them to traditional for loops. If you haven't seen that video, please look on my Introduction to Python playlist so that you can see the groundwork I laid in order to film this video. So here's what I have left over from that previous video, and essentially what we're doing primarily in these three loops is we are determining how many times we're going to loop, or printing out a certain range of numbers. I want to go back. I'm going to eliminate the second two types of for loops, and I'm going to keep the traditional for loop that has one argument, and I'm going to modify it a little bit. So let's say that we wanted to print every letter in a string. So if the string is, let's say it's a variable called text, and it's equal to hello, then I is going to represent each of the indices, the plural of index, for each of the letters. So I equals 0 is going to be the letter H. If you've seen my string manipulation videos, then you know that this looks something like this. Text of 0 is the letter H, text of 1 is the letter E, and so on. So we're going to use that to print each of the individual letters, or just to access them. Maybe we'll just print them twice. That's what we'll do. We're going to use that form, but using the I variable to access each of these letters inside of the for loop. The first thing I want to change is, instead of range 5, actually range 5 happens to work out here, but I don't know. Let's say that I had hello exclamation point. What I want to do is I want to use the length of text as our stopping point. The length of text is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is 6 characters, and each of these characters are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 0 through 5 inclusive is 6 characters altogether, and the way that the range function works is that we stop just before the actual value. So if the length is 6, then that means that we'll get to see the 5th character. So I don't need to do length of text +1 or -1 or anything like that. I just do length of text, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to print I anymore. Printing I would just print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I want to do is print text, and then just like how I would access the first letter like this, I'm going to do text of I. And then let's say I'm going to print it twice. So text of I, and it's a letter, so I can just do, I believe, a comma like that, and boom. So this should print HHEELLOO, and then 2 exclamation points on separate lines. Just like that. It puts a space in between it. I think that's some formatting on Python's behalf. I think if I put a plus, meaning that I will concatenate the two strings, there it is. There we are. The difference there is minor, and it has to do with the print function, but that's exactly what we would do. So this is not an enhanced for loop. This is how we would use a traditional for loop to print each of the letters of a string. But an enhanced for loop, which I'm going to refer to as a for each loop, allows us to do this much more easily. The syntax is for x in, and now you don't need to use range anymore. Instead, you can just say text. And what I do as a, just as myself, as a person who knows that it's important for your code to be readable by others, as well as you a year from now, which is basically another person, hopefully. I like to make this human readable. So if I'm using a traditional for loop, my variable for keeping track of where I am is going to be I, J, K, maybe even count. Normally it's just going to be a letter though, so I know, oh, text of I, easy. But if I type letter, that lets me know that what I'm getting out of this is an actual letter. And so this is how the enhanced or for each loop works. It's going to so reading it out in English, I'm saying for each letter in the variable text, do this. Assuming that we want to print both of the letters twice, we would just type print letter plus letter. We don't have to access the individual, the letter by its individual index. What the for each loop does is it just extracts each of the letters from inside of text. And it knows to do that because what I'm putting right here is a string. So it's assuming, oh, I'm going to get each of the letters. It doesn't know that I'm, asking for letters because the name of my variable is letter. It knows that, it knows to get each of the letters or each of the characters because it's a string. It is a variable of type string. So if I run this, it should do the exact same thing as the above. And let's see it run. So it should do it twice. Hello, that's the first one, the traditional for, and then hello, that's the second one, the for each. You can also use the for each loop on lists. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a quick list, and let's say that it's going to be a list of nums, so num list or of numbers. Num list equals 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 4, 8, something like that. 12, sure. And it's going to be the exact same syntax. For, and if I'm doing a list, then I'll say for item in, and then the name of the list, of course. So for item in num list, for each of the items inside of num list, do this, print the item. And maybe we'll just multiply each of the numbers by 3. Let's just do that. And there we are, down there. I'm multiplying each of the numbers by 3, so that's 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 3 is 6, 4 times 3 is 12, 24, 36, exactly like I requested. And so that'll access each of the items in the list very easily. And so this is something, this is a challenge that I give to, or I assign many of my students when they start to learn how to handle files. I'll say, given a list of numbers, either input by a user or whatever, print it to a certain file. And so, they have to open up a file first, and then, instead of just printing out the item, which, is easy enough, they actually have to write it into the new, into the document, which is, not much more difficult, but I think a good application of this basic idea. So the thing I want to talk about as a difference between these two types of for loops, all I've done is I've gone over the basic structure of them and, some very simple ways of using them. Of course, your application is going to, vary drastically, but the basic components are there. What I've gone over here just in these two videos is, the absolute basics of how for loops function. What I would like to do, though, is I would like to point out that if you ever need to access 2 letters in a row, for instance, in a string, so I like to use CodingBat a lot, and what they'll do very frequently is they'll say, return true or, print success or whatever if you have 2 letters in a row that are, the same letter twice in a row. You can't, or it is difficult to do that using a for each loop because with the syntax here, I only have letter at a time. I only get the variable letter every time. I can't say letter minus 1. That doesn't make sense. Whereas with the text or with the range traditional for loop, you can very easily refer to the previous letter as text of I minus 1, and you can refer to the following character as text of I plus 1. And there are dangers associated with that. For instance, if I'm going to be looking, let's say I'm looking at the following letter, then I don't want to look at the full length of text. I actually want to do minus 1. Because, if when I'm at H, I'm actually looking at E as well. And when I'm looking at E, I'm also looking at L, 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 O, and then O exclamation point. I don't want to look at exclamation point because then I'm going to get an error trying to look beyond that. I'm going to say, oh, what about text of I plus 1? And it's going to give me a range out of bounds error. It'll give me several different errors, actually, depending on, how you're using it. But, for that basic reason, you get a little bit more flexibility using the traditional for loop. So, that's something to consider when choosing between these two types of loops. There are ways of, determining if you've had, of keeping track of data that you've gone through in a for each loop. For instance, I could create a variable called previous, set it equal to an empty string, and then inside of the for loop, I could, always say previous equals, I guess I don't want to do that. I can say, something like if letter is equal to previous, then print duplicates, which, I don't really want to do. I'm going to get rid of the rest of that code. So print duplicates, otherwise, else. All I want to do is, actually I don't want an else statement for that. I'm just going to, if letter is equal to previous, I'm going to print duplicates, and then no matter what, whether, that statement is true or not, I'm still going to make previous equal to the current letter. And so this way, I can keep track of the previous letter by, before I move on, I'm going to say, hey, previous is equal to the current one. When I hit the end of this code, it restarts, it goes back, up to the beginning of the code, looks at line 11, looks at line 12, and at line 12, letter is a new letter, but previous is still, the value of the previous letter. And so that allows me to check for duplicates. So, again, if I set text equal to hello, duplicates should print just once, because we should have L and L next to each other. Just like that. So there are ways to get around it, but it's just a little bit less flexible. And that's all I have to say about that. So that is my basic introduction to the for each loop. Thank you for tuning in and paying attention. I really appreciate it.